Railblazer at California's Great America has got to be one of the craziest roller coasters ever built. RMC is known for making some thrilling attractions, but man, these Raptor coasters take it to a whole new level. Railblazer was the first of two RMC Raptor coasters to open back in 2018. It opened a couple of weeks after Wonder Woman Golden Lasso coaster at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas. These coasters aren't identical, rather, they're mirrored layouts. Interestingly, the RMC Raptor was originally built to support smaller parks, like Silverwood in Idaho, which has since gotten their own. But otherwise, most single-rail coasters have gone to major Six Flags or Cedar Fair parks. And unfortunately for California's Great America and for Railblazer, time is running out. Because Cedar Fair has sold the land that Great America sits on to Prologis, a real estate developer based in the Bay Area, the park will close by, at the latest, 2033. This is really a bummer, losing one of the more interesting parks on the West Coast, but alas, it is what it is. There's been some discussion as to what coasters could get relocated from CGA, and I think Railblazer is the most likely. Assuming RMC and Cedar Fair can figure out a way to transport that single rail track and break it up and build it again, then I think Railblazer is the most likely option to get relocated because of two main reasons. One, its footprint, and two, its age. This thing takes up almost zero real estate, which is one of the reasons why this coaster is so impressive. They get so much into so little space, but it also makes it so they could relocate it to pretty much any park. That being said, the capacity could be an issue for bigger parks. These trains only hold 8 people per train, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. But relocating it to a busy park like Cedar Point or Kings Island could cause major line issues. Getting back to my previous point, age. This coaster will already have been operating for 15 years if the park closes in 2033, and then if you look at the park's other coasters, they have a lot of older rides. Gold Striker opened in 2013, which is a little bit newer, and Psycho Mouse opened in 2001, so those could also be relocated. But looking at the other 6, Demon opened in 1976, Flight Deck opened in 1993, Grizzly opened in 1986, Lucy's Krabby Cabbies opened in 1999, Patriot opened in 1991, and last but not least, Woodstock Express opened in 1987. All that to say, the conclusion that I would tend to come to is that Railblazer is the most ready and most likely coaster to be relocated, also because it's a crowd pleaser and a terrific ride. If this ride does get relocated, what park could it be relocated to? I'm not entirely sure. Maybe Michigan's Adventure, maybe Valley Fair. It could even be a park that's currently on the Six Flags side, assuming the merger goes through. Assuming this park is operated until 2033, we have 9 more years to experience it at CGA as Railblazer. So for the rest of this review, let's just review the ride as it is in 2024. As I said, this thing is absolutely crazy. In fact, Alan Schilke, the designer for this coaster and the designer for a lot of the world's best coasters, even thought it was a little much. And if he thinks that, then you know it's really nuts. And it's not because this ride is super tall or super fast or super long. It only has 1,800 feet of track with a height of 106 feet and a speed of 52 miles an hour. In that short ride duration, it does feature a 90-degree drop and 3 inversions, and there are no dead spots on Railblazer, that is for sure. So if it's not the height and it's not the speed, why is this coaster so intense? Well, 2 things. Number 1, power. This coaster doesn't have any weak elements. The airtime is extremely good, and some of the inversions are great too. And number 2 is pacing. This coaster is less than half a minute of prime ride time, but what it does well is fly through its course at 57.5 feet per second, according to Airtime Thrill's video on the RMC's prime ride time. So when should you ride Railblazer? On a normal day, I would recommend riding this coaster early. It's not going to be nearly as ferocious. It'll still be pretty nuts, but not nearly as ferocious in the morning, but it can build up a line. From my past experience, if you go to this thing first, you should be able to pretty much walk on or have a 10-minute wait or less. But if you come back later in the day, don't be surprised if this coaster is well over an hour in wait just because of that capacity. CGA is sort of hit and miss when it comes to ops, but from my experience, Railblazer's ops are on the better side. They send out each train pretty much right on cue as the other train hits the brake run. The problem is that you're just not sending out very many people on the course at a time. Even though I would recommend getting on this coaster early, I would also recommend coming back and getting a ride later in the day because it definitely warms up as the day progresses. I think the back seat is the best place on this coaster, especially at night. Backseat night rides on Railblazer are sweet. And I tell you too, with the line going all under and throughout the coaster's layout, you get some sweet vantage points for a coaster that is so cool to watch off-ride. It almost doesn't look real. The single rail track is just like no other coaster design that has ever been done, and to see an extreme coaster of the single rail design is pretty darn awesome. So let's get into some of the more specifics of this coaster and what your experience is going to be like. After storing your loose things in cubbies on the opposite side of the station, you'll enter your trains, and you'll notice you'll have an over-the-shoulder vest-style restraint. I know there's been some pushback on these from enthusiasts, but really I don't think they're all that bad. They can dig into your shoulders or neck a little bit, especially on those airtime moments, but they're comfortable enough overall. Definitely not my least favorite trains. Would a lap bar have been better? Maybe, but overall these things are fine, and I think it doesn't ruin the experience at all. Straight away, you begin the climb up your 106-foot tall lift hill. It's at this time that some guests may start to rethink their life choices. Once you reach the top, you have a little dip downwards and a turn to the left, building up a little bit of speed before the first drop. This moment is better towards the back of the train because of the fact that you get pulled over it a little bit more. You then crest and descend a straight down vertical drop. This thing is epic. In the back seat, you get ejected as far out of your seat as you possibly can be before your restraints stop you. It's one of the more powerful airtime moments I've experienced, but it's possibly not even the most powerful airtime moment on this ride. Towards the front, it's a little freaky in a different way because you kind of hang over the drop a little bit more before descending. But no matter where you are on the train, it's one of the better drops to kick off a roller coaster I've ridden. You then go straight into a dive loop and go back the direction you just came from. Here's one moment that I think is actually better towards the front of the train, because you get ejected as you enter the dive loop. The first time I rode Railblazer in the front, I was particularly surprised by that moment, because I wasn't expecting the entrance to the dive loop to be such a strong ejector pop towards the front. Which is not to say it's a boring element in the back of the train either. In the back of the train, you really get pulled through and pulled down the second half of that dive loop. After a little bank right is this crazy twisted airtime hill. For this element, it really doesn't matter where you're sitting on the train, you're going to get thrown, and I mean thrown from your seat. I think I slightly prefer the traditional straight drops, but taking an airtime hill at that weird angle while twisting the opposite direction is pretty sweet and pretty nuts. I mean, we already knew Alan Schilke was willing to throw in some pretty crazy stuff, but this is one of the craziest maneuvers he's ever put on a coaster, and that's saying something. You then hit this little S-bend, rapidly twisting up to the right and then turning back to the left before your next drop. In the forces department, it isn't as strong as some of the other maneuvers on Railblazer, but it seamlessly transitions you between the first couple of elements and the last couple of elements. And once again, if you're in the back seat, you're going to get pulled through this maneuver, and it flies through this part of the layout, as it does the entire layout. The next drop is superb also. In the back seat, you once again go flying as far as you can into the air before your restraint stops you. In a lot of ways, it really does feel similar to that first drop, just on a much smaller scale. As far as which one I prefer, the first drop or the second drop, that's such a tough question. The airtime is so good in both instances. From here, Railblazer stops the airtime and throws in a couple of inversions, the first of which is a cutback. This is taken very fast, and while it is enjoyable and well paced, it's one of the weaker elements from a forces perspective. Next up is a corkscrew. This one is cool because of the rock placed directly to the left of it. This element is very fluid, but admittedly, I think it's something that's done better on RMC's hybrid coasters. For example, Joker at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom just down the road has a much better zero-G roll in my opinion with more hang time. It's a little ticky-tacky, so nothing too harsh there, but just something I observed. Then you have one more left-hand turn before you slam into the brakes. There's not much more they could have done here, so I think it's absolutely fine, and it's a great fast ending to the ride. Overall, I think the first half of Railblazer is more fun, but the second half still has some fun inversions, and then that final turn is a great way to cap it off. Your prime ride time is only about 25 seconds, but for the space Railblazer takes up, it's phenomenal. On the note of pacing, I've heard some complaints that Wonder Woman Golden Lasso Coaster at Six Flags Fiesta Texas is getting a little bit rattly, but from my most recent experience in December of 2023, Railblazer is still very smooth. The transitions between elements is great, and it just generally speaking flows really well. So after all this discussion, it's time to give Railblazer a final score. And that's an interesting question, because it's so good, but it's so short. I would have loved to see Great America theme this a little bit better than they did, so between that and the lack of length, I think I'm going to give this coaster a 9 out of 10. The layout and elements on their own are probably a 10, but there's just not enough of it to constitute it as a 10 in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, this coaster is incredible in a lot of ways, and I think it's the best coaster at California's Great America, despite Gold Striker being a very solid wooden coaster from GCI. That being said, I don't think it's the best coaster in Northern California and certainly not in the state of California. If it was a little bit longer, maybe it could be in contention, but for now, I actually prefer Joker at the aforementioned Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. Mainly because Joker doesn't suffer from Railblazer's major problem, ride duration. But Railblazer is still fantastic, and you gotta ride it when you're at California's Great America, especially because who knows where it could be going in just a couple of years. So those are just my thoughts on Railblazer at California's Great America in Santa Clara, California. If you've ridden this coaster, I'd love to hear what you think about it in the comment section below. Do you think it's the best coaster in Northern California, or maybe even the whole state of California? Let me know. And if you're new to the channel, I'd really appreciate you giving this video a like and considering subscribing to the channel for more theme park and coaster related videos coming out very soon. So with all that being said, thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.